I still have the video from the night he proposed. Sometimes I watch it, not because I miss him, because I'm trying to find the exact moment I stopped seeing a person and started seeing a performance. Everyone thinks this is a story about a man who changed. He didn't. That's what took me so long to understand. If Nathan never changed, then who was I actually in love with? I met Nathan on a Tuesday. I remember that detail because Tuesdays were never memorable before him. It was a work event, one of those rooftop mixers I almost didn't go to. I was standing near the edge, half listening to a conversation I wasn't part of, when he appeared next to me, holding 2 drinks, one of which, somehow, was exactly what I would have ordered. "You look like a person who'd rather be somewhere quieter," he said. I laughed, because it was true, and because I hadn't told anyone that. That was the first thing about Nathan. He noticed things. Not in a performative way, or at least that's not how it felt. He asked questions and actually waited for the answers. He remembered my sister's name after I mentioned her once. He remembered that I took my coffee black, then switched to oat milk in the fall. And he noticed the switch before I did. At the time, I called it attentiveness. I called it rare. I told my friend Hannah, "It's like he's actually paying attention, you know? Like he's really seeing me." Looking back now, I think about that phrase differently. Seeing me. Because there's a difference between someone seeing you and someone studying you closely enough to know exactly what to reflect back. I didn't know that difference yet. In those early weeks, Nathan asked me more questions than anyone had in years. What did I want out of life? What scared me? What my father used to say to me before he passed? What I dreamed about. Literally, the actual dreams I remembered. I thought I had found someone who wanted to know all of me. I didn't realize I was handing him the blueprint. 3 weeks in, Nathan told me he'd always wanted to learn how to hike the trails near my hometown. I hadn't mentioned hiking in days. I'd mentioned it once, in passing, weeks earlier. He remembered. By the 2nd month, he was reading the same books I loved, not skimming them, reading them, discussing them, quoting lines back to me over dinner like they'd always mattered to him. He started using phrases my mother used, small ones. Home is a feeling, not a place. I'd said that to him once, something my dad used to say. A few weeks later, he said it back to me, like it was his own. I remember feeling understood in a way I never had before, like I'd finally met someone who didn't just tolerate the things I cared about. He shared them, genuinely, completely. My friend Hannah met him for the first time around then. Afterward, she said something I brushed off. "He's great," she said. It's like he already knows exactly what you need before you say it." "Isn't that a good thing?" I asked. She paused. "I don't know. It's just a lot, this fast." I told her she was overthinking it, that some people just connect instantly, that not everything has to be suspicious just because it feels good. I believed that completely. And I think, if I'm honest, I'd always believed something like it. I've always been the kind of person who trusts effort. If someone remembers the small things, if someone shows up consistently, if someone works that hard to make you feel understood, I was taught somewhere along the way that you don't question that. You appreciate it. You don't pick apart a gift by asking who wrapped it. So when something felt this right, my instinct was never to slow down and examine it. My instinct was to feel grateful and to stop asking questions. What I didn't understand yet was this. Nathan wasn't falling in love with hiking or my father's sayings or the books on my shelf. He was building a mirror. And I was falling in love with my own reflection, wearing his face. The first time something didn't fit, I barely noticed it. Nathan invited me to his office holiday party. I was excited. I wanted to see this other part of his life, the part I'd only heard about. When we walked in, one of his coworkers greeted him and said, "Oh, hey, quiet guy. Didn't expect you to bring someone." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. But 3 more people said some version of the same thing that night. Quiet, reserved, hard to read. I stood there holding a glass of wine, watching people describe a man I didn't recognize. Because the Nathan I knew never stopped talking. He filled silences before they had the chance to exist. He asked question after question, told stories with his hands, laughed loudly enough that people at other tables looked over. On the drive home, I mentioned it, half joking. "Your coworkers think you're the quiet one. That's funny." He smiled and said, "I guess I'm different with you." I remember exactly how that landed. Not as a warning, as a compliment. I'm different with you. I held on to that sentence for months, actually. I turned it over like something precious. Proof that I was special. Proof that I brought something out in him no one else could. It never occurred to me to ask the only question that actually mattered. If he was that different with me, which version of him was the performance? And which version was left over when no one was asking anything of him at all? By month 4, Nathan was talking about forever. Not in vague terms. Specifically, he described the house he pictured us in, the number of kids. 2, he said, maybe 3. He talked about where we'd spend holidays, how he imagined my mother at our table every Christmas. It felt less like dating and more like being handed a finished blueprint of a life, one where every room already had my name on the door. I moved in with him by month 5. Everyone around me had opinions. My mother, Diane, liked him, genuinely liked him. The version he showed her, polished and warm and endlessly respectful. She'd call me after he visited and say things like, "He's very prepared, isn't he?" And at the time, I heard that as praise. Hannah was quieter about her opinions by then. She'd stopped asking as many questions. But one night over wine, she said something I didn't fully hear until much later. "I just want you to be careful mistaking perfect for good," she said. "The right person doesn't feel perfect, they feel consistent." I remember laughing it off. Since when is consistent romantic? She shrugged. "It's not supposed to be romantic. It's supposed to be true." I told myself she just hadn't met someone like Nathan yet, that she didn't understand what it felt like to be chosen this completely. I remember noticing, actually, that my closest friend had gone from curious to careful, and I told myself it was just because she was busy. What I didn't examine, not once, was the speed of all of it. How quickly getting to know each other turned into building a future. How little time there had been, in all those months, for anything to go quiet, for anything to get boring. For me to see him in an ordinary, unremarkable Tuesday, the kind where nothing is being performed because no one thinks anyone's watching. There's a certain kind of momentum that feels like love because it's overwhelming in the same way love is supposed to be. But overwhelming isn't the same as real. I didn't know that yet. I was too busy standing in the current, mistaking the pull of it for depth. It was my mother who said the thing I couldn't shake, even though at the time, I didn't understand why. We were doing dishes one evening after Nathan had left. She was quiet for a while, and then she said, "You know, I loved someone like this once, before your father." I asked what she meant. "He was wonderful," she said. "Everyone thought so. He knew exactly what to say to me, exactly what to say to my parents, exactly what to say to my friends. I used to think it meant he understood me better than anyone ever had." What happened? She dried a plate slowly before answering. I found out later that he'd said almost the exact same things to someone before me. Word for word, some of it. It wasn't that he didn't feel anything. I think in his own way, he did. But it wasn't me he was responding to. It was whatever he thought would work. I remember feeling defensive even then. I told her Nathan wasn't like that what we had was different. She just nodded and said, "I hope you're right. I just want you to know the difference between being understood and being studied." I didn't understand that sentence fully for a long time. I think about it constantly now. My mother wasn't warning me because she suspected something specific about Nathan. She was warning me because she recognized a feeling, a particular seductive feeling of being perfectly met. And she knew from her own life that being perfectly met isn't always the same thing as being truly known. I didn't take the warning. Not really. I filed it away as her past, not my present. The proposal happened on a hillside overlooking the coast, at the exact spot where months earlier I'd mentioned just once that I'd always wanted to get engaged somewhere with a view like that. He remembered. Of course he remembered. He got down on one knee and said all the things I didn't know I needed to hear. That he'd never met anyone who made him feel known. That every version of a future he could imagine now had my face in it. That I was, in his words, the answer to a question I didn't know I'd been asking my whole life. Then he handed me a small box. Inside was an antique compass, brass and worn at the edges, like it had traveled through decades to reach me. Engraved on the inside of the lid, "You'll always know where home is." I cried. Of course I cried. I remember thinking in that exact moment that I had never felt so certain of anything in my life. That's the part that's hardest to sit with now. Not that the moment was fake exactly, but that certainty itself can be manufactured. That the feeling of being chosen completely and perfectly can be constructed with enough attention, enough research, enough carefully timed words. I said yes. My mother cried too when I called her. Hannah was happy for me, or said she was. And I wore that compass around my neck for months afterward, touching it during meetings, during quiet moments, during nights I couldn't sleep. A small brass reminder that I had found my way to exactly where I was supposed to be. I didn't know yet that the compass wasn't pointing toward him. I didn't know yet that it never had been. I met Rachel about 2 months after the engagement, at a dinner with some of Nathan's former coworkers. She wasn't an ex. She wasn't anyone he dated. She'd simply worked alongside him for almost 6 years, long before I knew him. She was kind, easy to talk to. At some point, when Nathan stepped away from the table, she asked me a question I wasn't expecting. "Did he make you feel like no one had ever really understood you before?" I said yes, almost instinctively, and then laughed a little, embarrassed at how quickly the answer had come. She didn't laugh. "He said the same thing to someone else," she said, almost word for word, a few years ago. I remember feeling my stomach tighten, but I told myself it didn't mean anything. People repeat sentiments. It's a common thing to say. Rachel didn't push. She didn't bring out evidence or names or proof. She just looked at me for a moment and said something that stayed lodged in my chest for weeks afterward. "You're asking the wrong question," she said. "Don't ask who he really is. Ask why nobody seems to describe the same man." Then Nathan came back to the table, and the conversation moved on. Easy and light, like nothing had happened at all. But something had shifted in me, quietly, almost imperceptibly. I didn't go home and confront him that night. I went home, and for the first time in over a year, I started paying attention instead of just feeling. I started quietly, without telling anyone, looking back through old messages, old photos, things I hadn't thought about in months. I wasn't looking for infidelity. I was looking for something else. I just didn't know what yet. I found an old post from years earlier, before we'd met. a photo of Nathan hiking a trail I recognized. The caption was something about how hiking had always grounded him. I remembered him telling me, in our second month, that he'd never really hiked before I mentioned it, that I'd introduced him to something new. That was the first thread. I pulled on it, and more came loose. I found, in an old email he'd once left open on a shared laptop, a paragraph he'd written to someone else years before. Different name. Almost the exact same words he'd said to me on our third date, about feeling like he'd finally found someone who saw past the noise. I sat with that for a long time. Then I thought about Diane's warning, the difference between being understood and being studied. I thought about the office party, the quiet man his coworkers knew, so different from the man who filled every silence with me. I thought about how quickly we'd moved, how completely I'd been swept into a future that had been described to me in such vivid, specific detail before I'd even had time to imagine it myself. And I understood, finally, what Rachel had actually been asking me to see. It wasn't that Nathan had a secret. It wasn't that there was another woman or some hidden double life. It was that Nathan didn't fall in love with people. He studied them. He mirrored what he found. He moved quickly, before anyone had time to notice the seams. He secured commitment. And somewhere in the process, I don't know if even he understood this about himself, the studying became the only kind of loving he knew how to do. He hadn't lied to me, exactly. He had simply performed a version of intimacy so precise, so well rehearsed, that I mistook the performance for the real thing. I sat with the compass in my hand that night for a long time. I didn't call him. I didn't ask him to explain. I already had my answer. I'd had it for a while. I just hadn't been ready to see it. I didn't confront Nathan. I know that might be unsatisfying to hear. Part of me expected to. I'd imagined at some point a version of this where I laid everything out and demanded he explain himself, where he denied it or admitted it or cried or got angry. But I realized I didn't need any of that, because I understood, finally, that Nathan would never give me an honest answer. Not because he was incapable of honesty, but because I don't think he entirely understood what he was doing either. Asking him to explain the performance would only have been another performance. One more carefully chosen response, engineered to keep me exactly where he needed me to stay. So I didn't ask him why. I didn't ask him to apologize. I didn't ask for closure in the way people usually mean it. I packed a bag. I left the compass on the kitchen counter, in the exact spot where the morning light hits it every day around 8. And I walked out. For months afterward, I thought I needed answers from him. I thought if I could just understand why he did this, why he needed to become whoever someone else needed him to be, I could finally close the door on it. Then I realized that was the wrong question entirely. Every answer I actually needed had already come from what he consistently did, not from what he said. I still have the engagement video. I still watch it sometimes. Not because I miss him, because now I can finally see the performance I once called love. The timing, the practiced warmth, the lines that felt spontaneous but weren't. I think about the compass often too, about that engraving. You'll always know where home is. For a long time, I thought that gift was about him, about us, about some future he'd promised me on a hillside overlooking the water. I understand it differently now. The compass was never meant to help me find him. It helped me find my way back to myself. Home was never a person. It was the version of myself I lost while trying to love someone else's performance. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this. The most dangerous deception isn't someone pretending to love you. It's someone pretending to be exactly the person you were hoping to find. Real love doesn't come pre-written. It doesn't arrive knowing all your favorite quotes before you've said them. It's slower than that, messier than that. It has boring Tuesdays and forgotten details and moments that don't feel cinematic at all. I didn't know that back then. I know it now. I used to think love was about finding the perfect person. Hannah told me once that the right person doesn't feel perfect. They feel consistent. I laughed at her for saying it. She was right. And I've never trusted a perfect answer again.